Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Cold War Podcast, episode 333, the Triple Three. My name's Benjamin Yoder. Here today, talked about video games. We just got some very specific news stories this week. Otherwise, there's not a lot going on. I'll kind of go through some of my personal life stuff, but I think it's going to be a shorter episode this week. But first and foremost, I want to start with a announcement. It's been a year since I think I first mentioned considering doing this, and then hemmed and hawed for a hot 365 days. The only reason I know this is because last year at Portland Retro Game Expo, I recall at least talking to other people about this. I don't know if I talked about it on the podcast as quickly after, but I am going to be shifting the podcast to a every other week format here. So I'm going to be skipping every other week. And there's a lot of reasons for that decision. I've been very hesitant about it because if you don't know, on my side, this podcast does a lot of things. It gives me the ability to kind of just air up my thoughts on things, and in a place where it's kind of safe for me to just say stuff, right? I think when it gets to videos and things like that, I want to be very careful with my words a lot of times, and that's still kind of true here as well. But I think in the case of this, I'm at least very, upfront about things like when we talked about Rabbit and Steel and Final Fantasy 14 last week, that, my opinions on that are hot trash, in my opinion. And, and I don't think they're very well thought out, and I don't think they are, decent, thoughts and feelings. So there's things like that where I am in the process of understanding how I feel about myself and stuff, and it is a challenge, and it's nice to be able to say that out loud somewhere. But it's on this podcast, I don't think anyone really holds me to task for what I say on this podcast per se, right? I think this is a growing experience. You're in my life, right? And you grow with me. Hopefully you're growing with me. I don't know. So there's that side of things. The second thing is also, before I started this podcast, I actually kind of really fell out of keeping up with news. So that's kind of my biggest concern, is that if I don't have something I need to check in on weekly for news, that I'll stop checking news. So my hope is that I'll keep up with that. But at the very least, I suppose every 2 weeks I'll start going back and looking at news. I don't want it to be that, because as is, a whole week of news is already really tough to keep up with, considering how I look at news, right? It's different if you are just hitting the hot top headlines. We're not hitting the hot top headlines here. We are hitting the small, tiny headlines that I need to look for most of the time. And the last thing is it is a nice place to just dump my thoughts about games as well when I'm finished, and then it's a nice pinpoint I can put down and then look into later and fine. Right now I'm pretty deep in a lot of RPGs, so I haven't really had a lot of games to really go through. But I think when things get closer to me being hey, I'm just going to burn through a bunch of Wii games again, which I wanted to do recently, but Final Fantasy 11 got in the way of that. I want a place where I can dump those pretty quickly and not have to think about it too much as well. So those are kind of the main purposes. There's also the fourth item. I don't know if this is true as much anymore, but there was a while where I also used it as a way to keep myself in check, because a long time ago I had a really hard time putting stuff out frequently, which is, it's still a problem today, but it's a problem for a different reason today, where I'm traffic jam between too many different ideas. Where in the case of back then, it was more of just trying to act it out was a difficult thing for me at times. I would rather just, sit down and play games, which, hey, totally reasonable thing to do with your free time, right? When you're talking about video games on the internet. I think that last part is less true now. I don't know how much of that is true because of this podcast being an ongoing thing, or how much of that is true because I have changed as a person and I'm just more active in what I try to push forward now. But we'll find out. And I may still consider cutting it back even more. I was thinking about, so I think I mentioned on this podcast that I've been listening to No More Whoppers recently, which is a podcast featuring Ray Barnholt and Alex Fraioli, I think his last name is. And Ray, I only listened to because of Retronauts, so I didn't really know much about him. And then Alex, I met in Japan, and that's how I found out about him, and then listened to the podcast later, basically. And one thing he mentioned to me was he found the quality of their podcast went up significantly when they switched to going once a month instead. because they just had more valuable things to talk about most of the time, which it was something that I'm like, well, that's actually kind of pleasant sounding, but I don't think I'm ready to make that jump all the way down to once a month or something like that right now. So, yeah, but my hope is that it will give me more time to work on things. I mentioned last week I was going to try to stream, and I did not stream this week because A, a lot of things in life got in the way, but B, I also have to spend time doing this podcast every week. So I'm not saying that the stream would have happened if I didn't have to record a podcast this week, but time that I could have spent doing that stream is now being spent on me sitting here talking to you as I do every week. But not anymore. So anyways, it could be I find that changing it to every 2 weeks doesn't actually work well for me, and I will switch it back. But for now, that is the plan. And in a year, I think it's a lot of time where if I am still thinking about it, it's worth at least trying. So yeah, next week there will not be a podcast, and going forward, that may be also the case. If you're like, Ben, that is blasphemy, let me know. Any feedback is valuable. I get almost no feedback on most things in my life, so anytime I get feedback, it is helpful. So yeah. Anyways, in terms of just like what I've been doing this week, there's some things that I don't really have a lot of conclusions to right now, but have been on the brain. One of the really big ones has been somebody reach out to me on my personal Discord, although we moved it over to the PCFX fan club Discord because it was PCFX enough that I think it made sense to talk about it there. And that is the Blue Breaker version of, or the Sega Saturn version of Blue Breaker, which if you don't know, Blue Breaker is a old PCFX RPG, dating RPG, similar to like Sakura Tyson kind of thing. And there's ports that happened after the PCFX version, and one of those ports was the Sega Saturn version, which is actually handled by a company called Success. It is considered, as far as I'm aware, as I have heard from Japanese forums, it is considered a very broken version of that game. Apparently, there's a lot of issues with that. I did find out some information as to why that's the case, but I'm still trying to figure out if I can actually say that right now. When I talk to people, I try to make sure that like I understand what can be public and what they want private, right? A lot of the time. So I got to figure that out if I can talk about that more openly, if they're okay with that. But anyways, so I was looking into that, and yeah, we don't really know what's going on yet, but basically the story goes on the Japanese internet that HuneX, the company who published that version of Blue Breaker, basically made a revised version of that game that fixes a lot of the bugs, and allowed you to mail in your copy and get a new copy back with bugs fixed. There is no real official information on this version of the game. There is, as far as I can tell, no print differences, at least from all the discs that we've seen online of these versions of the game, but we don't know which versions of the games are which. So its question is like, okay, is this a rumor that started on internet forums? Or is this something that actually happened? So I reached out to Bobo at HuneX and got the response of basically he doesn't know. He was aware there were issues with that version of the game, but otherwise and at the time it sounds like maybe he had coworkers who were aware of it as well. But at this moment, he has no recollection of knowing of that program. He did say he heard about it later on the internet, but wasn't sure if it was true or not either. And then so we are now trying to reach out and contact somebody who posted about that program back in the day and seeing if they participated in that program and if they got a disc and if we can get a picture of what that disc looks like. Because it very well, I mean, there's kind of a lot of different scenarios here where either it is incredibly rare. HuneX went out of business like 2 years later, so it's incredibly rare because you had to ship your disc in to get that revised version. It can be incredibly common because maybe there was only certain versions of that games that were broken, but then like the second print run was fixed, right? We don't know how many print runs there were of that version of say the Sega Saturn version of Blue Breaker and stuff like that, right? Or it could just not exist at all, right? So there's a lot of variations that could be there. I did reach out to the Sega Saturn podcast guy. What is it called? Shirocast. He did initially respond to me, but did not respond to my follow-up comment to him. I probably won't try to reach out to him again and remind him of it until I have more information. But yeah, I don't know if he just lost track of our conversation or if he was like, I don't know anything about that, so I'm not going to respond, but I don't know him personally, so I'm not saying that means anything. When you're on the internet and you have like a following, trust me, where like even my small time baby boy brain ben youtube.com channel, it can be challenging to keep up with everyone. And so like this, and I'm like tiny, right? So the second that explodes into any number that's above what I'm at, basically, I'd imagine it is also incredibly challenging. So yeah, but it would be interesting. As far as I can tell, there's no other information online except for random people posting about it in Japan. So we'll see. But the guy that we're messaging, I don't have a ton of confidence we'll hear back from him. There's a lot of reasons why I won't get into it. But anyways, that is that. The other thing, and this is not anything new, so we talked about Rabbit and Steel and like the context with Final Fantasy 14 last week, and that stuff is still on my head, honestly. I think if I were not stuck between a bunch of stuff right now, in games, in life, and some projects I committed to and things like that, I would probably resub at this point and just start playing it. Just to start feeling it out, because I think I'm ready to reapproach that game, but it's just time right now. So, I did do a little extra research. I didn't want to look into it too much. I don't want to sit there and like, make a grand plan when I get back. Because I think part of the problem is, going back to that game is me going in with the expectation I'm trying to get something done. And I think, it would be nice to not feel that pressure and just like enjoy that game for what it is, and probably not do the main story quest would be the initial plan for sure. But I mentioned, I think last week I was looking at Red Mage and Blue Mage. I looked at the Red Mage ability list just because I was like, I know in concept, Red Mage as a concept, right? Magic, melee, right? That is kind of, or all magic and some melee, basically. And in case you did not know, Final Fantasy 11 did not really fulfill that role very well, because Red Mage just basically became a full-time mage, unless you just wanted to have a fun time by yourself, which is not something you could commonly do in old Final Fantasy 11. So I'm curious if it changes today now that like there's trust magic and things like that, right? Which, speaking of which, there's gonna be like a Final Fantasy 11 stage play apparently with like some stories that they're gonna tell that like weren't included in the game. So that's kind of interesting, especially if we're at the point where like they're not planning on adding more story content to Final Fantasy 11 again. Like delivering it this way is kind of interesting. But anyways, I have no real thoughts on that otherwise. But yeah, so I was looking at the Red Mage ability list just because like I was curious. And I mean, I have no context for what's going on with the Red Mage abilities and stuff, but I was looking at it, I was like, is it all like charge based, it feels like, which basically like what I mean by that is like you use certain abilities that charge other abilities, and then you use those abilities which drain those charges, and then you switch back to abilities that increase those charges. I don't have on a high level, looking at that ability list, that sounds incredibly uninteresting to me. I'm not saying it can't be good, it can't be fun, but reading the descriptions, I'm like, all these abilities sound incredibly dull. But I think there's a difference between reading an ability that says, has 150 potency and adds 2 white charges, and then if you have this many charges, it enhances this ability, right? Like, I think there's a difference between reading that and feeling it in gameplay. So I'm not counting it out right now. But I think that definitely I think everything I have done, like thought about with Final Fantasy 14 and getting back to it, I have has made me feel less enthused about my potential opinion of that game when I get back. And I also just did a little poking around on like what's going on with Blue Mage, which if you don't know, Blue Mage is a special class in that game where you basically don't play not most of the video game. There are parts of that video game you cannot play as a Blue Mage. And those are incredibly important parts, like, hey, the main story of the game, for a variety of reasons. But I think it's just because the class is a little too flexible. And thing about Final Fantasy 14, I would say, as somebody who does not like Final Fantasy 14 2.0 and beyond, but I would not say I am unbiased in this opinion as a Final Fantasy 14 1.0 and 1.23 fan. Everything about Final Fantasy 14 seems about, hey, what if you had no flexibility whatsoever? So I feel like Blue Mage, on the surface level, looks like a job that has some flexibility. I'm sure if you go and look online, there is some meta of the best way to play Blue Mage. I do not care. I am like really thinking I do not want to engage with any kind of guides or anything like that if I go back to Final Fantasy 14, because I do not care. Like, I don't know. I feel like everything that has to deal with like optimization in that game and like playing the game the right way, maybe is the way to put it. I was gonna say it in quotes, but nobody has said that to me. But what would be, I think, be considered the right way, sounds incredibly unappealing to me. So I think that will be my goal with that. But I think chances are I will probably, and I mean, there's so much content in Final Fantasy 14. I mean, I don't know exactly what Blue Mage is cut off of, but I'm gonna guess if I really want to spend time just playing and having a good time with Blue Mage, and I find that to be a good time, and I just want to keep doing it, there's probably enough content to keep me busy for a while. Doesn't mean I can go play the main story stuff, and that's fine. Right now, that's not my goal. I do not care for the main story of Final Fantasy 14 at this point. It's been so long, and I've completely disjointed myself from that story at this point. And I think everything else about that game has kind of poisoned my feelings about Final Fantasy 14 as a whole, that it probably has bled into the story at this point. I remember there are parts of 2.0 that I liked, but like I remember going to Heaven's Word and following that story and feeling like it was the most drag on forever story, which I know for 2.0 is even more true. But I think in the case of 2.0, I was playing as that game was live, so it didn't feel as intense. Where if you go back and play this game, after the fact now, it feels incredibly intense. And that's kind of one of the nice things about, you're going to sit here and compare about what Final Fantasy 11 does, that 14 is better at. But, I think Final Fantasy 11, like, the story stuff is there, and it is something that you can do, but it's not incredibly overbearing as, like, the main progress of that game. Which, I mean, hey, look, they're different video games, and Final Fantasy 11, if you want to talk about a Final Fantasy game with story, guess what? Final Fantasy 11, very little story on the surface level if you play that video game. There is story there, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of story there, but how that story interacts with you in the game playing process is very different and very less urgent. Where in the case of Final Fantasy 14, I think it is very urgent as far as I can tell. So, anyways, that's really where I'm at with that. I don't think I'll have time to do it anytime soon. I would not be surprised if I don't do it until next year. And hey, guess what? There's a good chance come January, I will have completely thrown this to the back of my mind, and I will not be thinking about this actively, because that is how I am as a person. So I mean, and this is the problem of the traffic jam of RPGs, is I'm stuck in these RPGs, and I want to finish them. And I'm not sitting there saying like, oh, I hate playing Arc Rise Fantasia, I hate playing Toukiden, I hate playing Final Fantasy 11. I really enjoy them. They're great video games. And I'm glad I'm enjoying my time with them. But it does mean that impulse I have of, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, all that gets blocked. And so, and to some extent, I feel trapped a little bit. But I still, like I said, enjoy those other games. So it's not like I'm sitting there going like, I gotta finish it. No, I enjoy Toukiden and stuff. But it's just a time thing. Time and space. The hit Final Fantasy 13 2 song. Time and space. It's Jillian's Corner time. Thank you, Jillian, again, for supporting us this month. We also got another supporter this month. Zero gave us some donations, so thank you, Zero. Again, if you want to ask a question for the podcast, you are welcome to do so. If you donate on Ko-fi and send me a message, and I will answer that question that you provide on the podcast. There are limitations. Do not send me a question asking about my social security number. I will not provide that on a podcast. Anyways, Jillian has asked us a question, though. Thank you again, Jillian, for support on Ko-fi. I hope I didn't say Patreon earlier. I always say Patreon. It's Ko-fi. Have you ever bought a game you knew nothing or very little about? I think you probably know this already, Jillian, at this point, but like, I often want to know very little about any video games I buy or play. So it is not something that I research very often most of the time. I usually prefer to go in fairly blind after I just talk about researching Final Fantasy 14 stuff. But again, trying to be very light about that. Just trying to make sure I'm not like setting myself up for immediate failure is basically what I'm doing with that. But so in most cases, things like Gormiti for the Wii, I don't know anything about Gourmety, but there are things I look at that box and it catches my eye and it draws me in, and I'm willing to take that risk for $5 to $8 of whether I like Gourmety or not, right? But here we are. I have not played Gourmety still today. But anyways, that is something I am willing to risk, though. And now that I don't care so much about physical media as much from like actually using it, I do like having the case just to remind myself Gourmety and like make a library and be like, oh, you know what a video game is that I have that I could play right now? Gourmety. Rather than just like disappearing into the ether of my brain of video games that I know it exists, but I don't actually play. But there are some situations where I do buy games that I have less knowledge of. And the easiest platform for this to happen on is the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. And unfortunately, the reality of that usually ends up being is I buy very few of those games because it's really hard for me to look at one on a shelf and be like, oh, this is the video game. I have to pull out my phone and research it. And, that's not a problem per se, but it is not the immediate goal of just picking something up and looking at some screenshots and being like, this looks interesting, right? 3 of those games that I did at Portland Retro Game Expo last year was Hamster Paradise 3, Kisekai Monogatari, and Dr. Rin ni Kimite. I think 2 of these, Kisekai Monogatari and Dr. Rin, I think are anime brands, if I recall correctly. I think Hamster Paradise is a hamster raising simulator from Atlas, if I recall correctly. I did not look at these video games at all, really beyond, excuse me, I just like burped in the middle of talking, and look at it beyond the label itself and them being very pink. I think maybe there's a girl on the Dr. Rin and Kisekai one. I think Hamster Paradise is a hamster, but I think Dr. Rin might just be like bubbly text, actually, now that I think about it. But this is all my memory of picking up a video game and buying it a year ago. I tend to not buy games this way because, hey, guess what? I still don't really know what those games are, and they're in my collection, and because I don't know what those games are, I do not know when I will look at them because I don't really get the urge to be like, hey, Transformers on the Wii. It's time, baby. What's going on with Transformers on the Wii? So that is the thing that I think is a challenge with that for me, is if I literally know nothing, then if I'm not playing it immediately, it just disappears into my library and I never see it again. So, unfortunate for those 3 games. Hopefully someday, but I think I'm going to play many more DS Games for Girls games before then. And guess what? I haven't played a DS Games for Girls game since Cheer We Go in like 2021. So please understand. Thank you. Things are coming along. Anyways. Thank you again, Jillian, for your question. Thank you again, Zero, for donating as well, and Jillian for donating too. Both of you for donating. And again, if you want to ask a question, feel free to donate to me on Ko-fi, and you'd be happy to provide that. And then also, the next time I do a premiere video, I am currently including thank yous at the end of those to Patreon or Ko-fi people. If you did not know that. So if you go look at the Hackhawks video and the Dog of Bay video, I think those are the 2 I think that it's included in. I don't think there is one for Babylon's Fall. I don't think that's there. So I have a lot of video ideas going on right now. I'm in a real traffic jam in everything in my life right now, and videos definitely are a part of that process. I did the Final Fantasy 11 thing. I tested it, and I got like in a position where I think I know what I want to do now. It's just a matter of doing it. And then also, there's the Animal Crossing video that's kind of still just like lingering about. There is the Somabringer video. There's 2 videos that are kind of on top of my mind right now that might be shorter videos I can put together, but I don't know. I don't think I'll know whether or not they will be shorter until I actually do them. So, and they're not time sensitive, but they'd be nicer to get done sooner rather than later. Thought about those this weekend, and I just don't know if I'm going to be able to get to those anytime soon, unfortunately. So they may disappear into nothingness, so I won't say what they are. So, and then also, of course, there's podcast stuff. Some what were it, guardrails? I don't know. Some things have come up on the podcast front. I was working with a few people on things, and a lot of slowdown happened. So as much as I would like to progress on that right now, I don't think it's going to happen right now. Which admittedly, I wasn't planning on putting anything out for that anytime soon. I wanted to get that done towards the end of this year, but realistically, I'm not seeing that right now. I just got caught up in too much other stuff this year. So, I had made a lot of plans before I went to Japan, and then proceeded to not follow up on most of those plans once I got back. I also did like one test recording, and some problems came up on that test recording. There's nothing wrong, and eventually we'll post that test recording up either as its own podcast on this channel or on like that's whatever that additional podcast idea thing I have is, because I'm going to probably release stuff in bulk, or at least finish the majority of chunk of podcasts and then release them at a scheduled rate for that set of podcasts. So what am I talking about? Why am I here? News time. We got some hot news here. Very exciting news for people that are me and you and my friend you. Anyways, we got some hot Otocadoll related news, or at least, I don't know, it's not, well, actually, there is one very small Otocadoll news story. I didn't look into this. I'm sorry. I did not look into this deeply. There are some new Otocadoll acrylic stands. I think they're a prize for like a web crane game thing. I don't know for sure. I didn't look into this deeply. I forgot to. I'm sorry. I'm here reading this line on here that says look into this more, and I did not. I think it's like a prize on a crane game thing, but there are new Otocadoll acrylic stands that they're selling, which is very fun. But probably the bigger news that is only like vaguely Otocadoll related, but if Solomon Program is any indication, Otocadoll may appear in this. There's a new game from likely that developer who worked on games like Oreca Battle, Dragon Collection, Solomon Program, and Otocadoll. It is called Oren, and it is for mobile and PC. It seems very heavily based off Oreca Battle, which, if you don't know, Oreca Battle, as far as I can tell, seems like the most popular of that developer's games. But it is also the game that I played a little bit of when I went to Japan. I went to like one, I think it was a round one that had a machine, and I played it there, and I was not particularly impressed from what I saw. I also have that like portable one. I think my problem with Oreca Battle comes down to like there are randomized elements to combat, and it makes it hard for me to get like super invested. But this might be a good chance for me to try it out and see what it is. There's an open beta right now. I forget when it closes. It's like 500 players. I opted not to get in just because I'm already kind of clogged up with stuff. But I think once the game officially launches, I will try it. But yeah, it is very much a monster collection kind of game, and it is very much presented in a card game style, even though on phone and PC, you will not be having physical cards, obviously, or at least as far as I could tell, that is not the case. So it looks neat though. But yeah, it has the same treasure chest monster from Oreca Battle. A lot of the character designs are very similar. I don't know who does the character design for those games. They have a very distinct look. The Oreca Battle ones, they always have like green eyes or something like that. And I think in the case of Solomon Program, they kind of stepped away from that a little bit. Unfortunately, I have not revisited Solomon Program. I need to. I will try to give you guys an update on that as soon as I can. It's just been a long time. And there could be a chance that I've always misunderstood the story of how Solomon Program turned out and that you can't play it anymore. But my understanding is Solomon Program is a game you can still play. It's just how it's implemented is different now. It's got like an offline version. But I saw someone that I think might be complaining that you can't download it anymore, though. So I don't know. I need to do some research into that and figure that out. But unfortunately, that is not something I'm doing today. Anyway, it's very exciting to see they're still going, and I'm glad they're thriving as a developer, or at least they're still pushing forward as a developer. No idea how successful Solomon Program was. It was around for a couple years, I think, 2 to 3 years. So I don't really know what the lifespan of like a live service game for Konami is and stuff like that. Obviously Square Enix, I have a little bit better understanding of how those games play out, but Konami, I don't really know. I think 2 to 3 years for most developers is probably like we gave it a shot. We may have broken even or made okay money or lost money, and it's time to move on kind of thing, right? Where in the case of Square Enix, that is, did you figure this out in 12 months? We are shutting this game down. So yeah. So very exciting. This isn't really news, but something I found out about recently, although it was something that started happening this year. HuneX, our Lord and Savior HuneX, the best developer in the world. If you don't know, they are a longtime developer. They developed a lot of Bishoujo games back in the day and a lot of RPGs, and they did Simple Series games for a while. Long history, diverse background. Project Witches. We were looking at that in the movie night on the Discord recently. And Project Witches we were looking at, and that was kind of a simulation raising game with like idle elements. I think it's supposed to be like Idolmaster, but everybody kind of looks like toddlers instead. Anyways, they launched a publisher for Western games. However, that is not for Western published games. Like what I mean by that is that they are saying, hello, Western game developers. Would you like to have your video game released in the Asian region, specifically Japan? And they did launch this earlier this year. They have one game under their belt. Let me see if I can check out what game that was here real quick without disrupting our podcast too much. Almighty Tree, The Last Dreamer, is the one game they published. I think it was like in May this year. So obviously has not been a lot happening in that front. They published that, and it's like some game developed in Wales or something like that. So it seems like they're trying to break into that market. If you don't know, I mean, HuneX is involved with a lot of big like visual novel IPs and things like that. I was looking recently, and they did all the like PS4 and Switch versions of the Fate games and stuff like that as well. So I have a feeling they get around a lot, and I don't know how successful they are per se, but they've been around for a very long time, and have continued to make money in their niche. It seems like enough to survive at the very least. So I'll be curious to see if they do any more with that. The publisher branding for that is called Tensho, by the way. There's also, if you didn't know, there is another label for HuneX games called Dramatic Create. I believe Dramatic Create is their porting label. I think that's how that works. So I think Dramatic Create is the porting label. Tensho is their Western publishing label, or Tensho is a Final Fantasy 11 thing. Tensho is their publishing thing for Western games, and then HuneX, I think, just delineates which games they specifically made. I feel like I've seen a mix of HuneX on some ports, though, I will say, like that label. I could be wrong. I'm not looking at those games physically very often. I will typically only buy HuneX games if they are made by HuneX. So, anyways. Touch Detective 3 is coming out to the West. If you don't remember, a long time ago, we talked about the Touch Detective collection. Came out in Japan, I think, last year. Or maybe it was this year, I don't remember. But they released Touch Detective 1, 2, and 3, remade for the Nintendo Switch. Touch Detective being a point-and-click adventure series for the Nintendo DS. That was kind of niche, but people liked it. It's got a really cute sense of humor. Someone told me recently that it was kind of like a parody of, well, I don't know if it was deliberately so, but it felt like at times like a parody of adventure games where it was like, we're going to lean into the fact that none of our solutions make sense kind of thing. But that's like part of the humor of the game. But they're doing something interesting for this localization. If you did not know, Touch Detective 3 did not get released in the US back in the day. I think it was a 3DS game, if I recall correctly. And so what they're doing is they're advertising this new collection as Touch Detective 3 plus the complete case files. So as far as I can tell, just the collection again. But they are saying, hey, this is a new video game, Touch Detective 3, for you Westerners. So we're going to sell it as Touch Detective 3 instead. But also, it includes the complete case files in there. So, as far as I can tell, same product, just labeled differently because of our history with Touch Detective 3. Anyways, some very exciting news stories in there. I like all those news stories. Very fun. Those are the kind of news stories I like to see in my life. Anyways, yeah, I mean, just as a reminder, for some reason you had this podcast playing and you were out in a car driving and you got in a car accident and you missed the first 6 minutes of this podcast. You're like, Ben, I was traumatized and I don't have time to roll back in this podcast to listen to what you said at the start of the podcast. Reminder, I'm going to try to go to a every other week publishing schedule here. See how that feels. If I hate it, then hey, I can always come back and do every week again. I get a feeling that it will probably work out all right though. So anyways, that's all. Again, I did not stream this last week. So if you were like, Ben streamed, let me look up the archive. I did not do that. I would like to. Probably will not next week, though, I will say. Just busy right now. So I might have to wait until November to really plan to do that. I mean, it doesn't take that long, but it is still multiple hours of my night to do that. So yeah. Anyways, I hope you guys have a great week. Thank you, or great 2 weeks now. Enjoy yourself for the 2 weeks. Does that mean we're going to miss Halloween? I'm kind of curious. Let me see. We're going to miss Halloween, baby. Enjoy your Halloween. I got a little ghost here on my microphone that's hanging down. Woo! I got it at the Portland, what's that called? What's that place called? Planes go in there? Airport. Portland Airport. They had a little ghost there and like one of the random like gift shop things. Like, that's cute. I will buy HLW friends? So what's on that label? I don't know if that's the shop or if that's just who made it. Midwest CBK. I'm looking, I still got the label on here. I should probably take this off. Corporate capitalist ghost. Got a barcode on him. I don't know. What was I saying? I don't even remember. There's no new content though. Please enjoy. No new content time. But again, if you didn't listen to it, we had our PCFX Fan Club podcast recently. If you want to go back and listen to that. Otherwise, I am just kind of jammed up right now. So I'm hoping stuff will happen, but we'll see. Anyways, that's going to be it though. Thank you again. Talk to you later. Bye. Oh, OneControl.com is the website. Now, bye.